Hi, my name is Roger Lowe, and I work for the SAP Data and Data Management team out of Africa. And I'd like to take 10 or 15 minutes of your time to chat to you about a process that we've come up with for helping customers to measure the total cost of ownership impact when you introduce SAP HANA into an SAP landscape. So where this all started was back in about 2014 when HANA was released for ERP and BW systems. We went to customers and we tried to explain the benefits of HANA. And most customers understood quite easily and quite clearly the technical benefits that HANA would bring into their organizations, the speed, the real-time operational reporting, the compression, and they could also understand the business benefits that could come along with HANA coming into the process and the shorter financial closing cycles and all of the other benefits that SAP articulates around this. But what we found was that wasn't good enough. What customers really needed to do was to be able to create a valid business case with valid numbers uh, in the business case to present to the business to say we need a certain amount of money in order to purchase HANA, and this is the justification. So we put together some really rough spreadsheets initially that took a couple of variables into account, and we tried to work out what the potential uh, total cost of ownership savings might be over a period of years. And on the basis of this, we were able to put together some documents for those initial customers highlighting where we would see potential savings for that individual customer. And on the basis of this, we managed to convince customers to purchase HANA. The really nice thing about this whole process was, a couple of years later, once the customers had implemented HANA, done the migrations, and been running for a while, they were willing to stand up at some of our events and talk about the actual measurable total cost of ownership reduction savings that they had seen in their particular system. So this wasn't just a theoretical exercise, this was an exercise based in reality. So we've now gone through this process with about 25 odd customers. In most cases, it's been very useful for those customers to understand the impact of introducing HANA into the environment. In some cases, customers saw huge benefits. In other customers, other areas there, in other customers, there probably weren't that strong benefits, but at least the customer could understand what the actual numbers represented. So, what exactly is this TCO model? Well, primarily, it's just an Excel spreadsheet that takes a whole series of variables, which I'll touch on later, and allows you to run some calculations on those variables to produce an outcome. Now, the Excel spreadsheet is just part of this process. It's more about the methodology of sitting with the customer and discussing how HANA might benefit their environment and where those benefits might come from. And again, the reason why we did this was that PowerPoint presentations are not good enough to just simply take through to a business case. But what I think is more important is, what is this not? So this is not really an official SAP tool in the sense that we could just send you the Excel spreadsheet and you fill in some values and you click a button and it produces a result. Every customer's landscape will be different. And so it's a process where the Excel model is really a tool to place place various numbers in, and then as part of a workshop, you discuss those numbers, we adjust the model, we look with the benefits, and we come to an agreement of where the benefits might come from and how much do we expect that particular customer benefits to be, and then that produces a result. Now, by its nature, because this is a high level estimate, it cannot be an exact science. The idea is that you go through this process and you'd get a high level view of whether the introduction of HANA would potentially save you some money or cost you some money. And if it turns out that it does save you some money, then the next part of the iteration would really go into the fine detail to actually see exactly what those numbers were. So it is an estimation at best for the total cost of ownership. So what does it actually do? Well, our thought process was the following, that if a customer is currently running SAP, something like ERP, BW, it is currently costing a certain amount of money to run those systems. And the first kind of data point that we wanted to get to was to say that if the customer never went onto HANA, how much would that cost be over the period of time that we were measuring? So the model can measure anywhere between 1 and 10 years. So if a customer wasn't going to HANA, how much would their SAP systems be costing them in development, hardware, landscape, all those kind of things over a period of time? So this is the as is cost if you didn't go to HANA. The second point would be to say, well, how much would it actually cost us to get to HANA? And this is composed of three primary points. And those 3 points are obviously the SAP HANA license would be a factor. The second thing is that you would have to migrate certain systems to HANA, and how much would that migration effort cost you? And the third part of it is, well, where are you going to deploy it? Are you going to deploy it on premise? Well, then you might need some HANA appliances. How much would those HANA appliances potentially cost? Or maybe you're going to deploy in the cloud. What would be the cloud cost? So we're trying to see what the total costs involved are in order to get you onto HANA. The third data point that we look for is really nobody would just migrate to HANA if there wasn't a good reason to do it. So the question is, what are these benefits that HANA might bring us, and how would we quantify these benefits? So when we say potentially HANA can reduce your development costs, in what areas of development would that reduction actually be, and how much would that reduction be, and over what period would we scale in that benefit? So we look at all of those benefits. Once we have those 3 data points, it's a simple mathematical process to figure out what the total cost of ownership would be between doing nothing and moving to HANA, and which would actually be cheaper in the long run. So on the output of this, um, it will consider a whole series of different criteria, because moving to HANA can actually, we found over time that there's a lot of factors that one has to consider. And what you're seeing coming up on the screen at the moment is a series of these, what we call variables in the model, where we try to factor in what are the factors that influence the total cost of ownership. So for example, if a customer was planning to buy a whole series of database servers as part of a standard hardware upgrade process, and now they decide to go to HANA, and now they're buying HANA appliances, then surely the budgeted cost of those other database servers needs to be offset against the incoming cost of the new appliances. You know, was the customer planning to do an EHP upgrade or Unicode migration? And if we go to HANA, could we not potentially do that in one step, so then we combine the costs of a HANA migration with potentially a Unicode migration and look at the cost differentials? You know, if a customer is currently running on a third-party database, at some point they would probably stop paying the third-party database when they go to HANA. At what stage will that happen? At what point will they kick in? You know, what are the benefits to the business? How do we quantify those various business benefits, and where do they kick in? So there were a whole series of these variables. In fact, there's, I think, approximately 60 of these different variables that we look at to try quantify the HANA TCO. At the end of the day, what this Excel model will do is produce the TCO graph. And this is the graph that you're currently seeing on the screen. As you can see, it's from anywhere between 1 to 10 years. We can choose the period of the model. The red bits is the initial cost, the total cost that we were talking about in the migration, the hardware, the licenses. The blue areas over there is the potential benefits that we've identified and how they would scale in over time. The yellow bits are potential business benefits. So we try to differentiate pure technical IT benefits from potential business benefits. So you get both views in one. And then the point is to see where does the dotted line cross the 0 point, and at that point it actually becomes more cost effective to run HANA than to stay on your existing system. As I said before, having a picture is not good enough for a lot of financial people. So behind every single graph in the system is an Excel spreadsheet where you can dive down into the numbers and see the exact figures. This is just a sample showing you on the screen that these numbers are visible, and then these numbers can also be drilled down to get to the nth level of detail inside the model. Now, we talk about this picture to a lot of our customers, and this is to say that in most organizations there's a very fixed IT budget, and unfortunately anywhere between 72 and 86% of that IT budget is used simply to keep those systems ticking over, and that's a a lot of studies have come out with these numbers. So there's very little IT budget left over to do innovation, to drive the digital transformation of a company, and there's not much scope for those IT budgets to be increased dramatically. So the key message from SAP is, if you put a digital platform like SAP HANA in place, potentially it can allow you to shrink that keep the lights on portion of your IT budget and create more scope to do business innovation. So this is again is a PowerPoint picture, and what the model does is it actually converts it into numbers based on the inputs that we provide into the sheet. So you can see in this particular example, there's 4.5 million worth of budget that's now been freed up for innovation based on the introduction of HANA, for example. So it's just an interesting view um, of how a company's IT budget can be reorganized. So the model has got lots of graphs, and here's just a slide showing a whole series of these various graphs, and I'll go into a few of them in the next couple of slides. Just to say that behind each one of these graphs is a very detailed spreadsheet that you can look at the numbers, you can adjust the numbers, and you can make those numbers your own. One of the main graphs that we look at is to see at a high level where does the benefits of SAP HANA typically hit an organization. So we typically divide the TCO into four main areas, and that's the effort involved in building or developing applications on SAP. The next area is the operational running of those SAP systems. The third area is the hardware that needs to support the SAP environments. And the fourth area is something we call Shadow BI. So Shadow BI is becoming a standard industry term, and this really is the amount of effort, cost, software, and hardware that an organization goes through in order to get access to information at the speed that they want from systems that cannot deliver them. So we find that a lot of customers are expending a huge amount of their budgets extracting data out of ERP and pushing it to satellite systems and then running third-party tools on top of them in order to get information out of them. And it's our belief that the introduction of HANA into a landscape like that would allow customers to radically reduce that kind of side IT, side expenditure process. So typically we tend to see anywhere between 20 and 40% reduction in the development costs when you introduce HANA, and that's not a view that SAP state. These are views that have come out of organizations like Forrester Consulting, IDC studies. We typically see anywhere between 5 and 9% on operational reduction. So for example, if you're looking after a HANA system that we've consolidated a number of instances into a single one and we've had massive compression, then your DBA will have a lot less work in order to manage those systems. And if we don't do table reorgs or index reorgs or database optimizations, then we can save a huge amount of effort in that space. Typically in the hardware area, we don't see a huge reduction because you are potentially buying a SAP HANA appliance. But sometimes we come across situations where customers were just about to invest in very expensive legacy disk-based database systems as a hardware upgrade, and they can replace it with a fairly affordable HANA appliance in order to do the same amount of work, if not better. And then we generally see a very large reduction in the Shadow BI real-time operational reporting capability area. Every customer will have a different graph, but as long as it's looking similar to what you've seen on the screen, then we think that we've got some good numbers in the spreadsheet. What the model can also show is the change over time between the CapEx and the OpEx expenditure out of the IT budget, which is a very useful thing for the financial guys to take a look at. And then we go into a lot more depth in each subsection. Previously, I talked about the four sections. This is the first one, which is the build development. And what the model allows you to do is define various areas. These are user definable of how your team is spending their IT budget in what areas, and look at the potential effect of HANA on each one of those areas. And then additionally, look at when will that benefit materialize and over what period of time, and how much benefit will materialize. So for example, you can see in this is that the highest area of saving really comes in the tuning phase, because on legacy disk-based systems you spend a lot of your time on database optimization, SQL optimization, where we don't have that issue with HANA. So that would be an indication of where you might see some savings in that there. Then if we look at the operational running of SAP systems, again, you can use a definable criteria, look at the various areas, see what the effect of HANA saving would be, and when would that be implemented. The same thing applies to the Shadow BI. By default, we do populate the model with some default values, and things like development operations, the software, the hardware, the cost to the company of Shadow BI are the default values in this area. Again, all user definable. And then lastly, we look at the impact of hardware change from going from potentially a Unix-based database server to a HANA appliance. What would be the effect in operating systems, antivirus software, monitoring software? What would be the effect on your backup software with a much reduced data footprint? So a whole lot of factors get considered in this area. And then we pull this all together to give you what we call an all benefits timeline, which is to say, well, okay, these are all the benefits across all those 4 areas. How would they phase in? When would we expect to see some benefits, and how much benefits would we get in the process? We also provide a rudimentary Excel heat map to just take another view of these various areas and see where the biggest benefits may come into play for any particular customer. And the darker the green, the more benefit that you would see. So it's just a different visual interpretation of the results. There is a beta version of a tab which tries to look at the differences to a customer of whether they've actually paid cash for the total HANA migration or whether they used a finance option, because the speed at which the benefits occur and the level of benefits can be affected with how the transaction is completed. As I say, this is a work in progress, probably not the core part of the model, but it is quite interesting for customers to look at. Okay, so this all sounds very interesting, but how do we actually go about getting this done? Well, fundamentally, it's a combined process between SAP and the customer. The customer has to be willing to provide certain input costs, because this is an Excel spreadsheet and it expects to get certain values so it can make calculations based on it. Therefore, we need customers to provide those inputs into the model. On occasion, we have sat down with customers and provided the logic of how the model works, and then given the Excel spreadsheet to them, and then they've populated it themselves because they didn't want to expose certain numbers to us. But in most cases, we work with the customers and we get the various inputs that we would need. At that point, we would then go away and we would construct an approximate HANA landscape for the existing SAP installation. We consider the whole landscape. We try to figure out how many machines would be needed, how big should the HANA appliances be, look at the costs associated with that, and then we come back and we do a HANA TCO workshop where all of this information is exposed and gathered together. So when you look at the actual Excel model, it can look a bit daunting and complex initially because there's a whole series of these different tabs at the bottom. But the real point is that there's only one tab that requires input values, and that's what we call the Start tab. Go onto the Start tab, it's got a whole series of questions, fill it out, put in the numbers, and you press go, and the TCO will be worked out. And thereafter, it become a matter of refining the model to each particular customer. So just to look at the Start tab in a bit more detail. Again, this may look quite complex, but we have divided these questions into subsections, and all the questions are written in hopefully clear English, and there is a help file associated with it. But again, this isn't something that you would do in isolation. This is something that you would generally do with your SAP representative, go through each section And generally, it shouldn't take longer than an hour or two to fill in the sheet, and then you've got the first cut of what the total cost of ownership could potentially be. Prior to the workshop, we do send a input sheet to the customer. As I say, a maximum of 62 questions. Um, the SAP pre-sales people can help fill it in. Most of these questions are yes/no values, so it's a fairly simple process to go through. And as you can see, there's a fairly comprehensive explanation of what each value means and what you should put into it. Thereafter, the pre-sales will fill in the remainder of the values into the model, run it through a couple of iterations, and then get to what we consider to be a first cut of the model. The next step after that is we set up a workshop where we come and explain exactly how the model works, debate each line, debate each metric, debate each saving, see how it applies to each individual customer's landscape, and then see what the final result is. And then as an optional last step, we can provide what we call a HANA point of view document, which essentially takes all of this input and puts it into a nice PowerPoint format with real numbers in that can then be added into the final business case, which then goes to the customer's approval area. So I want to be very clear to say that the HANA TCO process is simply one process of the journey that takes you to HANA. There are other processes that we strongly suggest that you involve SAP with. There's a process called IVE, Industry Value Engineers, which looks at the particular impact of HANA on your particular industry, be it retail or automotive or utilities. There's the BSR process, the Business Scenario Recommendations Report, which actually analyzes exactly how your existing system is running and what the impact of HANA would be in your particular environment against the particular transactions that you're running. And we can take the input from both the IVE and the BSR and apply it into the HANA TCO process to get a more comprehensive view of both the impact to the pure IT space as well as to the overall business case. So that's a very quick view of the HANA TCO model. If you want to take this any further, then you can either reach out to myself, my email is on the screen, or suggest you contact your local account executive, explain what you want to, and they'll get in touch with us, and then we can progress this process. Thank you very much for your time.